Welcome, Jen.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
So tell me what it means to be a certified money coach.
I actually went through this process through the Money Coaching Institute. But when I'm referring to money coaching more specifically, that's when we're dealing more of the psychology of the things around money. So the emotions, your relationship around it, and more specifically, what are the things that you learned from your mom or your dad or whoever raised you? What are those things that you inherently took on that we are not usually aware of because that's why they have become subconscious patterns? And so when we take a look at those things and we do a deep dive and we look at what we call your money story, sometimes it's also called your money bio. When I have clients go through that process, they try to recall the earliest memory that they had with money. So, for example, let's say, okay, I remember my mom gave me $1 when I was 5 years old. I went into the candy store and bought a lollipop. And so you start to go through these memories and then you start to look at these patterns, and those things are subconscious patterns. And then those things are actually key indicators of like, oh, this is why I can't save. Oh, this is why I feel so guilty when I spend money. I'm afraid to let it go. So that's what money coaching is all about, looking at the relationship you have with money and looking really at the psychology and the subconscious patterns that you have developed over time.
And how does that link to your new book titled Do Before I Do?
Do Before I Do, which is about the conversations that couples need to have or they should have before they take that next big step, whether that's moving in together or whether that's, we're going to get married. I think it's really important for couples to talk about money because oftentimes what usually happens is like, oh, we get along emotionally, but a lot of couples fail to look and see, do we get along financially? Do we have the same values? Do we approach things that happen to do with money? Are we on the same page? And so when we don't have that conversation and we don't find out, okay, where is your thought process coming from? That's why money and arguments around it are like one of the biggest reasons why people get divorced. I was part of that. I talk about that very openly in the book. And so the reason why money coaching is so important is because, for example, let's say your husband, we're so used to seeing your mom budgeting and taking care of that. Now, let's say your other partner didn't do that. Maybe they were so used to seeing it getting taken care of. So when you grow up with different backgrounds and you're seeing one person handling one thing and then you don't see it over here, now when you get together, there's this expectation like, well, I never grew up doing that. So I always thought you were going to handle it. And then the other person might think the opposite. And so now there's these unmet expectations and arguing around it because nobody sat down to think, okay, well, who handled the finances when you were growing up? So as you can see, that's one example of how it's so important to take a look at where are these things coming from? Because if you don't talk about it, it's going to be this thing like, oh my gosh, we're arguing all the time. Why are we arguing about it? It's because we don't talk about it.
Jen, I can echo that. My parents growing up were very 50-50. There's times where I grew up watching my dad clean the floors on his hands and knees. And a lot of the times my dad was at home with me while my mom was working. And there would be other times where it'd be vice versa, where my mom was taking time off with me and my dad was working all the time. So for me growing up and in my relationships and even just my personal budgets, I'm going into relationships with a very 50-50 non-traditional outlook. But I know a lot of my friends, for instance, being women, a lot of them have grown up with dad making all the money. So they're also going into relationships, as you mentioned, with that childhood story relating to them all the time. Tell me about some stories that you're seeing from your clients, even just currently, given everything that we're going through in life financially right now.
Yeah, one story that I remember, one of my favorite clients, there was a situation that he remembered as a 9-year-old boy. They were in the car and he goes, like any typical 9-year-old kid might say, he goes, hey, dad, can we get McDonald's? And the dad turns around and he says, do you have money for that? And of course, like anybody, especially when you're feeling that reaction, he just shrank back and then just kind of sat in the back of the car. And so what's interesting is when I see clients recall these memories and they'll say, wow, I haven't thought about that since, how many years ago? I mean, he's like in his 40s, the mid 40s now, but he remembered that moment. And so what ended up happening is because of that instance that had happened, he developed this guilt. There's this, and that's a very, very common emotion around money. There's this guilt, there's this shame, and a lot of it also is unforgiveness. Those are very, very common among a lot of us. And so he developed this guilt. So even as growing up, in the stories that he recalled, when the parents offered help with school and college, or hey, do you need us to chip in to help you buy a car? He always felt this guilt of taking it because in the beginning, his dad already made him feel bad when he had asked for McDonald's. And so you start to see these patterns, whether it goes from the dad or from the mom, and you can see like, oh, this is where I got my savviness from this parent, or this is where I get this shame from this parent. So something like that can happen where the smallest little thing that happened affects you today. And so we had to work through where we need to improve the relationship with money. And a lot of times too, this is the other one I see often, especially with women. We're always providing. Some of us have children. And then there's always this guilt. And there's always this feeling like, well, I don't deserve this. I'm not worthy of this. We want to go cheap. We feel that we shouldn't buy certain things. And then that becomes a problem because then we don't allow ourselves to enjoy things in life. That's when we don't allow ourselves to feel good about buying these things because even society, even in the financial world, we have all this pressure. Well, you shouldn't be spending money on this and you shouldn't be buying this. And, you need to cut every latte out of the budget. And that's like, I agree with some of that information to an extent. But when your lifestyle is now becoming this like prison where you're not even enjoying anything, like, what's the point? You're not operating your life in a way where you can enjoy it. Am I saying spend everything and blow your 401k plan? No, I'm not saying that. But when I'm sure you've seen some advice where almost like the person giving advice is making you sound like, live like a pauper in order to get out of your situation. It's like, that is not living. So there needs to be a balance in the advice that you implement. And I think it's really important, especially for women to realize it's okay. Like I tell some clients, look, if you want that, whatever you order at the coffee shop, go buy it. Am I telling you to go buy it every day, every week? No, but to totally tell you to take it out of the whole, plan. No, I'm not going to ask you to do that because that's not living anymore.
Trust me, I don't even look at the price of lattes anymore. I just buy them. I just buy them and I don't care.
Yeah, and I think, as long as you're still able to take care of your other bills and be responsible, have at it. Have at it.
The way I always see it is for me personally, I'm not the type of person that goes out to eat a lot. Not that I'm not a huge restaurant person. It's just I don't order out a lot. I do love cooking at home. So that frees up a bunch of budget to splurge on expensive coffees.
Yes, and if that's your thing, I just say enjoy it. Enjoy it. I'm so glad to hear that you're doing that.
Agreed. Now, Jen, it is very clear and evident how passionate you are about money and money problems within relationships and within families and within gender roles. Were you always this passionate about this? And how did we get here?
I actually have a background in graphic design. And so the interesting thing was, it was very lucrative at the time. And I remember sitting there, this is like more than 15 years ago now. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, okay, this is great, but I want to make a more of an impact. And then I thought, remember, what if I get into this industry? I want to be able to talk to people in plain English and not talk over their head, make them feel comfortable, and do this in a very simple way where it doesn't have to feel confusing. It doesn't have to be this like, oh, I'm lost. I don't know what to do. I don't want to ask questions. And so I started realizing like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I want to change that. I want people to feel comfortable and not intimidated because that was something that I was hearing in the very beginning. And I wanted to change that so that there was no longer this confusion because if we don't have clarity, we're not going to make progress. We're not going to take the next step because we just want to stay in the analysis paralysis and just be like lost. We don't want that, but that's where we end up staying. And so that's how I ended up getting into all this because I wanted people to understand this. When you understand it, it can change so much in your life. It eliminates stress, worries, problems, and then you can lead your life going towards what you ultimately want to do and all these dreams and goals that most of us have. And so if we don't get the money thing right, we can't accomplish any of those things.
Yes, I hear that for sure. Money truly makes the world go round, and I've heard many quotes that once you figure out money, you can figure out just about anything with how the world works. Now, Jen, all that being said, talk to me about some of your personal money realizations, whether money stories that you grew up as a kid. You mentioned you went through a divorce, so maybe money issues that you dealt with in the divorce. The floor is open.
Yes, I'll talk about the divorce. We were mentioning about the book. And even in my own situation, I joke around that the title should have been Do As I Say, Not As I Did. And so I share these things because I've been through it. This is not to chastise you or anybody reading it. It's just more like, hey, look, I've been through this. Please don't do what I did because it was not fun. It was very expensive. And I know you can do better than I did. And if I can influence anybody to make better decisions, then I'm grateful for the experience. And so I didn't have that money talk. We had a lot of financial arguments. And here was the crazy part. For me, it was like, wait a minute, why do I feel like I'm always arguing about why we shouldn't make a certain purchase? My ex-husband he was a great salesperson, very charismatic. So, always able to justify a large purchase item. And then I didn't want to argue. So then I would give in. The point I'm trying to make is that we already weren't on the same page. I was a saver, he was a spender. And so we were constantly arguing about like, well, why do we need that? Like, well, why can't we get it? We work so hard. And it wasn't like I was super cheap. He was just like over the top. For anybody out there who's in a relationship, going through a relationship, or wants to get into a relationship, you have to talk about these things. And even if you're single, this doesn't exclude you. Understand who you are, understand your values, because when you have that guiding North Star of what your values are, then when you do meet somebody, you know what's going to be in alignment with what you want. It's not going to be this difficult thing because the other problem you run into, like, well, I've been with them for 8 years. I don't want to leave. And it's like, oh my goodness. So you want to create 8 more years of financial hardship? That's the thing that, I've been through myself. And then even after going through divorce, I even did this workshop with 3 other women. And so the thing that was a common thread amongst the women that were attending was that they didn't pay attention to the financials. And it was so sad because now here they are in this divorce situation. It was women going through this transition. They were realizing they gave up their power. They allowed their soon to be ex-husbands all the financial responsibility, completely just ignoring it. And so ladies, or even I know there's some men that don't take financial responsibility in your situation, in your household. You both need to be on board. You both need to be looking at how to manage it. Now, one of you might be stronger at it. I'm not asking you guys to be financial experts, but please, I urge you, do not be that person. It's like, oh, they handle all of that. Talk to them. And then you're completely in the dark because I'm telling you, I've seen some divorce situations where the spouse who didn't manage anything is now completely lost. It's a mess. I don't know what we had. Can we look at? I'm like, you can't. You're not on the account in and say, hey, what's the balance? They're not going to talk to you. They're not going to talk to us. And you do not want to be in that situation. Not that we want to get there, but you have to be prepared. You have to know what's going on in your financial situation. And especially when there's somebody else involved, because God forbid you get into that situation and maybe it's not a divorce. It could be a premature death, an accident. You can't ask at that point. You cannot be in that situation like, well, I don't know where the files are. I don't know what bank. I didn't handle it. You cannot allow yourself to get into that situation. It is not fun. So that's some of the things I think are really important to point out. And when you do that, if something should happen, you're going to be independent. Sure, there are going to be things you're going to have to learn. Sure, there's going to be, but at least you're not going to be starting from the complete darkness.
Yeah, that's really good advice. In your divorce in particular, obviously money gets brought up a lot, especially at the end when you're starting to divide assets and starting to divide bank accounts. What did you experience when you were going through the divorce and figuring out how to split up everything?
Yeah.
Stories?
Oh my gosh. My horror story all stems from the real estate that we own. So I'm in Southern California, so homes are not cheap here, for one thing. And we had multiple properties at the time. And so I think it's really important that when you're purchasing something like a home, you really need to understand the rules. You need to understand title, who is on the loan, all those things, all those details, have the information, have the account numbers, understand who has ownership, who's going to be responsible. Because I'm telling you, divorce can be really, really ugly. And the person that you thought you were going to spend the rest of your life with, all of a sudden can potentially become your worst enemy. And so when that happened in my situation, you're so clouded. It is so crazy. It was such a confusing time because you're going through something so emotionally devastating. And then you're trying to handle finances. and legalities and whatnot. And it's an ugly mess. And so in my situation, he ended up being on title. I was stuck on the loan. I had no ownership, but I was responsible for the house and I wasn't even living in it anymore. I mean, it was a mess. It was an absolute mess. If you are going through that situation or if it happens, get professional help. Get an attorney, get, a real estate expert, get the people you need because there were things like, when the dust settled years later, I went back to see, okay, what could I have done? Oh my goodness, so many mistakes. How did this paperwork go through? So much time had already passed by then. I was just like, forget it. Like, let me just cut my losses and just be done with this. I'm telling you what happened to me so that you understand the importance of why you need to prepare and how important it is to be proactive so that you're not reactive. Because there's a lot of times when there's timelines and deadlines that you have to meet. And when you're in, confusion, let's say it was a death and you're mourning, you're not thinking straight. I promise you, I don't care how intelligent you are not thinking straight. And that is when you make tons and tons of mistakes. And so I'm just showing you what happened to me and why I'm so passionate about making sure people you're prepared, that you have everything lined up so that you don't have to go through the same disaster financially that I did.
Take us back a few steps. I'm getting into real estate, so I know what you mean by make sure you figure out who's on title, but I don't know if our vast audience knows what that means. What does it mean to be on title in real estate?
Yeah.
And going and buying a home with a significant other, what do you recommend on paper to have done?
Oh, yes. Okay. So title is just basically this document that says you legally own the house. Okay. So, for example, in my situation, I was no longer on title. That was the whole situation. We undid it. And I left him on title. So I was on the loan. So you have the disaster, right? You can totally see where this
Sounds
is.
like you're on the wrong side of things,
Oh,
Jen.
I was totally on the wrong side of things, and yeah, it was bad the way that whole thing went down, and it's so stupid. It's so stupid when I look back because I'm thinking like I know better. But again, when you're going through such an emotional mess, it is amazing the dumbest things you're gonna do. But if you have done that, another thing that I tell people: have grace, have forgiveness. We make mistakes, but life goes on. So, title is a document that you have ownership of the house. You can be on it together or it could just be one of you. Now, the loan is a completely different thing. They're separate. Just because you're on the loan doesn't mean you necessarily own it. No, you are financially responsible for paying the mortgage. This person that's on title doesn't necessarily have to be on the loan. So, this is something that has to be very carefully thought out. Probably the best scenario, every case is different. I would say for mine, the best scenario would have been that we were both on title still and that we were both on the loan. Now, on the loan side, the thing is, depending on who's qualified in terms of like, okay, how great your credit score is, and his was terrible. So I had to do it by myself, but he was just dragging my credit down. So I had to qualify by myself. So, it was just a disaster. It totally, destroyed my credit. I had to rebuild it, all these things. So I'm telling you, I've been to hell and back. So you can totally recover from this stuff. But my goodness, if you don't have to, don't do it. Trust me, don't do it. Just take my word for it. And so that's what happened. So it's best if you're both understanding, like, okay, we're going to have equal financial responsibilities. Because here's what happened. Here's what I'll tell you the next part of the story. So he decides, like, he saves in it. I got out of it. Now I'm still financially responsible for it because I'm on the mortgage. He decides to stop paying for it and he's living in it. He owns it. Now it was only on me. I don't even live in the freaking house anymore. And I had to keep paying the mortgage. And so, long story short, I let it foreclose.
I am cringing for you.
Yeah, it was
So
crazy.
I remember when we spoke initially, you talked a lot about how you made a lot more money than your husband. And it sounds like that's exactly why you owned the entire mortgage because he had bad credit. So tell me, if we have listeners right now who are thinking about buying a property with a significant other, should you even buy something if one of the people have bad credit? What do you recommend? Tell us what you would have done to not get yourself into that situation.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you asked this, Janelle, because I think so many times, again, going back, we don't talk about the financial stuff. Most people don't. And
Jen,
even
love is blind.
totally blind, double blind, like totally legally blind. And it's so important that you talk about credit. It's so important to talk about IRS, tax liens, the whole gamut. It's so important to talk about bankruptcy. All these things you have to know. And I know you're probably thinking, like, well, how do I bring that? Let me tell you, the first property that we got, I found out when I was in escrow.
Tell everyone who doesn't know what it means to be an escrow.
Yes, I'm so glad you're asking these questions. So, escrow is this moment in time when you're going through the real estate process of buying or selling. And it's that period of time. It can range in different number of days 30, 45, 90. Of course, you want it fast. And so, that's that moment of time of like, okay, we're handling the transaction of buying and selling. And it's such a critical mass point of time where all the documents are being lined up. We're making sure the funds are in place. And so escrow is that moment during that time. And so I'm literally in this situation buying a condo. And I remember so vividly, I was on this family vacation and I'm literally trying to, and this is before cell phones. I'm trying when everybody had a cell phone. I'm literally on this a rotary phone in this cabin, trying to get connection, talking to the lender where the person that's helping me get the money for the house. And all of a sudden, they brought up this thing like, "Hey, did you know about this Sears credit card?" And I'm just like, "What the?" Because I don't even
Damn
own
you,
that.
Sears.
Yeah, damn you, Sears. And it's like so embarrassing because I'm like, how stupid this credit card from from a department store. It wasn't even like a Visa. It was like Sears credit card. And what happened was when I was in high school, I co-signed a Sears credit card with an ex-boyfriend. Not the ex-husband, it was somebody else. And so it was just like all these dumb things, right? And what happened was I completely forgot about the card. It had been years since we had been together. It was just something stupid you just do as a kid. And then what happened was he racked up all this debt on the Sears credit card. We were co-signers and completely forgot about the card. But here it is, rearing its ugly head right when I'm buying the property. And they're like, well, it's drag, it's went delinquent. I forget what happened. Basically, it was not good. Long story short, they were able to take it off. I was able to still qualify and thank God escrow closed, meaning I got the house. But again, going back to your question, it's so important for you to understand the credit history of the person you're trying to get involved with. It's so important for you to understand your own credit history so you don't have these freaking surprises at the wrong time, so that you have time to fix it, so that you have time to qualify, you have time to make things in the most ideal scenario for you and your partner. And if you don't talk about it, you're going to either find out at the wrong time or you're going to find out, wait a minute, now you're in a rush. That's the other thing. When you find out ahead of time is on your side, so you can improve it. But you don't want to be having those conversations at that time when they're like, hey, we just put in the offer and, well, this came up. It's just like disastrous. So the better prepared you can be and having those upfront conversations is so important. And I know it's not comfortable. Let me tell you, it is like 1,000 times more uncomfortable feeling like, and then you're so mad at yourself because you didn't have that conversation.
So, all to say, make sure you have your ducks in line before escrow. That's exactly what this means, people. Do not have any surprises during escrow. You'll probably lose the house. Coming from
Yes.
a new real estate agent. So,
Yes,
Jen,
exactly.
I personally think money is sexy, and I remember going on I might have been on my 3rd or 4th date with the person I'm currently dating, and I was asking them their salary right away because I like talking about money, but in general, Jen, for most people, talking about money is not sexy. It's very taboo, and you really don't wanna be talking about it with your significant other. So how do you breach those conversations?
I think what's important for you to realize is at what point, and we all know, especially ladies, you know, when it's like, oh, let me see how this goes, or oh, well, he's cool to hang out with, or no, you just know, especially when like, hey, I really like this guy. I can see this going somewhere. When you get to that point, if it's with that person, start asking some questions. Maybe, you might not be asking their FICO score like on this first or second date, but eventually maybe she won't handle it the way we would, but you got to ease into it and just say, it can be as simple as like, hey, you know what? This is getting pretty serious. And so I do have some questions because I see this going long term. but I want to make sure that I'm an open book too. So if there's any questions you want to ask me, and I think this is probably key too. So that doesn't feel like you're just being nosy and prying. It's that, hey, I want to meet you where you're at. I want to see if this is something that's going to grow into something serious, even more serious. If we can just lay our cards on the table so we know what we're dealing with. And I am more than happy to answer any questions that I'm asking you. When you can break the ice that way and make it seem like it's not you attacking or you just trying to be nosy, it's like, no, look it, I care about you a lot or I love you and I really want us to make a really great future, but also make sure that our finances are going to be starting on the right foot. I talk a lot about communication in the book. And I think the way that you position things, the way that you approach it is almost way more important than the types of questions that you're asking. I think you have to remember to have respect and be listening and be really listening. There's a difference between hearing and listening and just being very open minded to the questions and being able to create that environment where you're comfortable talking about these things. Because if you can establish that from the beginning, your relationship is going to be so much more solid. You get to this fun part where like we're winning. Hey, what are we saving? Hey, what's our next goal? How on target are we for that vacation to Bora Bora? But you're going to be excited about it because you started on the right foot versus like, "Ugh, what do we have now? How many days do we have? What's our grace period?" You don't want to have those kind of conversations. So the earlier that you can start and break the ice about how serious you are about this person and how much you care about them, and this is the reason why you're asking these questions, the better off you guys will be.
What are your thoughts around splitting bills when one of the people in the relationship makes significantly more than the other person?
Yeah, I think it's something that's a personal decision for both of you. It's not exactly fair to go like 50-50. Because let's think about it. Let's say one of you makes 40,000, the other person makes 100,000. You're going to ask one person to contribute 20,000 and the other person, that's like nothing. That's just paying taxes or something, right? So you really have to come to this agreement of like, hey, what do we agree on? Okay. It's almost has to be this proportionate agreement like, hey, okay, I will take care of the rent, this. How do you feel if you take care of this? And as long as you both are comfortable and as long as you both come to an agreement and then you feel fair. The thing that people don't realize is like that person already might feel bad, like, oh, I'm not contributing as much. And so it's really important that that is not used against that person. Or somebody can use it as a tool, a power move, like, well, I'm paying for everything around here. I mean, that is not gonna fly. That's not establishing trust. That's not establishing open mutual respect for one another. So make sure that you come into an agreement with who's going to pay for what, depending on your incomes. I will say, I don't totally think the 50-50 is like the way to go. Again, if it works for you, have at it. But I just want to mention it's probably not the most feasible way to approach things because it's just skewed. Now, the other thing I will say too is going along the lines of like, should we do separate or joint accounts? I think it's both. And again, the answer is usually it depends. Everybody operates differently. Whatever works for you works for you. But I think as long as you have an account, and maybe it's a joint one where you agree, I'm going to put this much in, I'm going to put this much in, depending on how much you can contribute. This account can be the account where all the responsibilities are coming out of mortgage, rent, utilities, if there's kids involved, all those things are coming out of here. And then you can maintain your own accounts, and then that person can spend the money how they want. And this person can spend their money how they want in their own separate accounts. But if the responsibilities are being taken care of, then everything's taken care of because you agreed already to what's supposed to be contributed to this joint account.
I love that. I agree with what you're saying. I like the idea of separate but joint. And I also like the idea of proportionate budgets depending on
Oh,
income because I live in Toronto. It's a pretty expensive city and I see a lot of couples getting in relationships and one is making significantly more than the rest and some people I know they still split everything 50-50, and it's hard for the person in the relationship at a lower income to get ahead in their own personal life as well. So I was curious of your thoughts on that. But to detract from that, from more the relationship side, I loved your story about the real estate with your divorce and whatnot. Given obviously you see so many examples and stories from your clients of their money troubles, but what are some of your own personal money failures that you're like, "Ugh, like awful?"
yeah. Well, that the real estate one I share was probably one of the biggest ones. I think from that scenario, oh my gosh, so many disasters stem from it. The credit history was completely destroyed because, again, I was making 3 times the amount of income, so everything was literally in my name. So he wasn't on the hook for a lot of stuff because his name wasn't on it. I couldn't qualify if he was on the loan. So I took the hit on everything, everything, literally, and I suffered, like, all the ramifications afterwards, and then it was a ripple effect, losing some properties, and then, it was just like a snowball just going down, down, down. It's just, like, crazy, but, I mean, I laugh because it just to show you guys that you can recover from this. Everything is fixable. Everything is recoverable. And granted, I didn't save the marriage, but life goes on and you can fix these things. And I'm telling you, like, I almost get worried that I've become desensitized in a sense because I've seen so much disaster, but because I know that the outcome is so easy. I shouldn't say so easy, but I should say that in the big scheme of things, when you're healthy, when you have family, when you have love around you and people who care about you and you have a good, strong support system, those things legally or financially, they can always be fixed. Yeah, it takes time. But it actually develops your tough skin. And so, when you do run into the next failure or whatever mess ends up happening, you start to realize like, hey, you know what? I've gone through hell and back. I can totally figure this out and get better. And then you build your network and then you meet professionals like yourself and you realize like, if you can get good at getting the help and fast and knowing who to go to and building that network, you will figure it out. And that's what happened to me. I was able to go to certain people. Hey, what do I do with this? Okay, like what do I need to fix with this? And then you do it one piece at a time, one step at a time, and you can completely recover from it. And so I want to encourage you if you are going through that. I want you to know it's not the end of the world. It may feel like it. It will feel like it when you're going through it, but it's not going to be the end of the world. And then imagine like what I've done now. It's like I share this over like would I have talked about it back then? Probably not. Probably not. I would definitely not be going on a podcast. But I've written a book talking about it. I've been on multiple shows talking about this. And so it just comes to show you that you do recover from it. You will get over it and you come out stronger and better and wiser. And so when you can focus on looking forward to that, just know you can get through anything.
Jen, how long did it take you to recover financially after that disaster?
Oh my gosh. There's even, I'll be honest, there's some parts that are still being fixed. It's been 10 years.
Credit scores aren't built overnight. It takes a
Oh,
long time.
no. No. And then you go through new situations and going through the divorce. It was so messy. We didn't even get an attorney. We had a horrible mediator. I mean, it was just bad. So bad all the way around. And again, I think it's so important for people to realize have some grace upon yourself. Okay. So the great thing about me is that I know a lot, but I've also been through a lot. So I have a lot of empathy when I do talk to people. Because I think sometimes when we think we're talking to professionals, especially in the financial field, we think that they're perfect. Let me tell you, it is so not the case, okay? But because I've gone through all these disastrous things, I have so much empathy and compassion. So if you've been late on one credit card payment, I'm just going to hug you like, really? I had to tell a client that one time, like, if you only knew what I went through, and I gave her the story. She's like, wow, I'm so glad you told me that. Because she was going through massive debt. And at the time, she was separated from her spouse and then ended up going through a divorce. She's in the process of it. But when we can be vulnerable and transparent and not being afraid of being honest, you don't know how many people you're helping. And so I can have complete empathy for anybody's situation.
Jen, what I love about you telling these stories is I agree with your clients. I wouldn't want to go to a money coach or a money advisor that never ever had money troubles. That doesn't make any sense. You are very much qualified, is what I'm saying. But it's just relatable. When you have money troubles comes a lot of shame. As your client, if I'm coming to you as a money coach being like, I don't want to show you any of my debt or my credit card mishaps, if you open up this conversation, be like, hey, I've had my own money issues and still cleaning them up today, they're going to have such a overwhelming relief knowing that you understand where they're coming from.
Yes, thank you for saying that. It's such a great lesson for all of us, no matter what kind of help you're getting. You have to realize it's all of us are in this world together, building community, helping one another. And sometimes we're just a few steps ahead. We've all lived through something. And the way I look at it is like, If we can just be transparent and like, hey, this is what I've gone through. This is why I can talk about it. This is why I can completely understand what you're feeling because I've gone through all of that. And so I can even come from a place of knowing, like, hey, you're going to be fine. You're going to fix this. It's going to get cleaned up. And I'm not going through the emotional turmoil that you're going through. This is why I can think clearly. This is why I can think logically and make those decisions with you and for you and together. I just want people to know, like, it's gonna be fine. Trust me, you will recover from it. This year is going to pass, and then we're gonna go into another year. So have hope. I think, if anything, one of the attitudes that I adopted right in March when we went into quarantine was like, okay, this is happening. We don't know how long it's going to happen, but are you going to choose to have a mindset of being a victim, or do you want to come out of this being a victor? I put my mindset to thinking, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to take advantage of what I can. I'm going to form relationships and work on my business and do what I can. And I think I just never looked at it like, oh my gosh, the world is falling apart. Granted, it felt like that. But I want to encourage you, think about how you're looking at your money. How are you looking at your situation? Are you looking at it with hope or despair? And I'm telling you, if you have to really be honest with yourself, because the way that you're approaching it and your perspective on things is really going to affect your atmosphere and your relationship with money.
Yeah, and that brings up a big question that I had. I talk a lot about mindset as well. I believe that your mindset links to every positive part of your life. However, Jen, it's so easy to say, have a positive mindset and you'll be fine money wise. It must be hard to say that to the person that's dealing with financial burden today and looking at the end of the month and being like, I don't know if I'm going to make it. I don't know if their mindset is gonna fix anything in 15 days, so what do you say to them? Yes, it's mindset, but what are some tactical things that they can start looking at today to feel a little bit better about the end of the month, the end of the year, going into the new year financially?
That is a great question. And you're absolutely right. I completely agree with you. It isn't just like, hey, we have my magic wand and it's all positive, puppy dogs, rainbows, and butterflies. No, it's not. That's a part of it. That's a big component of it. But you're absolutely right. There does need to be some tactical things, very practical things. You need to take action. And one of the things I do notice that this is a simple way for people to just change the trajectory of things is like a lot of times we don't even have a plan. There's no plan. There's no tracking involved. So if you have never created a spending plan, a budget, I know some of you hate that word, so I call it the B word. If you've never created a spending plan, start there. It's that simple. Go online and find one. There are millions of spreadsheets. Pick one that's super simple. And if you don't even just want to make a Google spreadsheet or an Excel spreadsheet, it could be that simple, but know where your money's going. I think it's even important for you to start tracking like everything that you're buying for 30 days. Start there. And you will start to see where the leaks are happening. You will start to, oh my gosh, I spent $14 on lunch the other day. You will start to see it. But when you don't track it, especially if you're not using cash, it's very easy to just keep swiping and swiping. And then you don't even know where things, and you're like, wait a minute, I have more bill than money at the end of the month. Start there. If you have never tracked it, I think it's so important that you start today so that you can very easily start to identify, like, okay, this is where all the money's going. It's because if you don't assign a dollar an assignment, if you don't tell it where to go, it's just gonna poof like you used it on whatever, the dumbest thing sometimes. And then from that point, when you've tracked it and you realize like, oh, I'm spending too much on food. I did a video last year and everybody was like commenting, oh my gosh, yes, food is the part that I spend so much money on the budget. You have to start adjusting. You can't adjust until you don't know where, you don't even know where the money's going. Start there. It's so simple. Just start being diligent about tracking where the money's going so that you can adjust. And then you will identify like, okay, you know what? We're getting a little crazy here. We need to reduce it. And if at that point you're like, okay, I've scraped everything down. At that point, my next suggestion would be you need to start finding ways to infuse more income because you can only reduce so many expenses to some point. I mean, it's not like you can cancel your rent and utilities, right? So this is where I've advised some clients like, okay, what is it that you can do? Are there anything like, and I take some clients through a core genius exercise. We're like, okay, what are some things that you can monetize? And people get creative. Here's another exercise. Write a list of things that you love to do. Hobbies. What is it? And then find out, okay, how can I monetize this? Find out some ways that you can start finding more money or creating more money, because that's the only next thing you can do. I mean, people are so creative. It is amazing what some people sell. A friend of mine's kids, they are 10 years old, twins. They're selling lip gloss. They got even more creative. They started creating the lip gloss like formula to sell that so that people can white label their own stuff. I mean, it's 10 years old, 10 years old. So people, I know you can do it. You have to just find these ways. Start a baking thingy. I don't care what it is, but you have to find ways to monetize your creativity and the things that you love to do.
To give some examples, the thing that I do every single month in terms of budgeting. So I do all of my spending on a credit card. I never use a debit card and I just use credit card for points and so that I can track every single dollar. And one thing that I do is at the end of, well, I shouldn't say the end of every month, the 10th day of the month when the credit card statement comes out. I think I was doing this past Friday night. Everyone, I am a nerd. I am not as cool as people think I am, trust me. Actually, probably no one thinks I'm cool, let's be honest. But anyway, so the Friday night, what I do is I take my credit card statement and I copy it and put it into an Excel spreadsheet, and then I take every single line and categorize it. And then I total up the amounts. I have all the formulas already done, but then I total them up and see exactly what I spent. I wanna know where every single penny goes. And I even have a section of gifts. So it's like if I went to Bath and Body Works and bought a friend a candle, that goes under gifts just to know exactly what I'm spending there too. So that's one thing that I do, and it's really made me aware of what I'm spending. And then to give you an example of finding ways to increase income, I follow a girl on Instagram and she's all about money and finances and personal finances. And she's created her own Excel spreadsheet. So basically a version of what I have, but on steroids, and she's selling it on Etsy. And she's very open about her income just through this Etsy spreadsheet tracker. She made 7K US last month.
Oh my gosh, it's
7K US.
amazing.
So for all my Canadian listeners, that's about 9,500 Canadian a month.
How many times did she create that spreadsheet?
Once, Jen.
There you
She
go.
might edit it. She obviously spends time promoting it, but you gotta think majority of people I know in Toronto are an average people are probably making 50, 60K Canadian a year. So what's that in US, Jen? Like 40, 45 kind of things?
Yeah.
And in living in Toronto and living where you live, that's not going to get you very far. It's crazy to say, but it's not. So, like you said, there's only so much cutting you can do when you live in a high cost of living city. You have to find ways to make other income and you just have to look at your simple skills. If you're good at Excel, start teaching an Excel course, start taking freelance. If you're a graphic designer, start taking freelance clients and do the bulk of your work on Sunday evenings. And you can double your income very easily in time.
Absolutely. I love everything you said. And I love how nerdy you are. You already dialed in your bookkeeping. For the audience listening, that's an amazing way to show that, hey, she's on top of it. She knows exactly what is being spent and it's all categorized. Because here's something else I think it's a great segue to mention is that when you are in a situation where eventually you want to borrow money and get a loan, especially for your business, she's set. She's going to have all these documents, all these things, and it's going to show like, hey, everything's categorized. This is what I spent. And it's so important to start tracking it because trust me, when you're trying to get the loan for anything, the time to prepare for that is not the day before you're trying to apply. That preparation comes months and years in advance so that when you're ready to apply, you're ready to just furnish the documents and show everything has been on point for years. Those are the people who get approved quickly. Those are the people who get great rates. And so there's a whole method to the madness. And why we're telling you to do it is because it's to set you up for success and to set you up to be on the trajectory for financial freedom and creating this abundant lifestyle that you really, truly want at the end of the day.
Quick question to bring you right back to the beginning when you say our childhood money stories. How do we switch those money stories? How do we reverse them?
Yeah, I think the first step is for you to identify what they are. Let's say there's a young girl And she remembers, okay, my mom was single when we were growing up. And I remember she was always running behind on the rent. Lights were always being shut on. And when you start to recognize whatever that incident was when you were a child, try to think about what are the emotions that are coming up for you? What do you remember going through when that was happening? And then take a look at where you are today. Okay, how has that, now that you're aware of that, I think that's the first part of it. When now that you have become aware of what happened, have you even stopped to ask yourself, how is that affecting me now? Are you hoarding? Do you end up becoming somebody that ends up spending money? There's sometimes when somebody will say, like, well, you know what? I grew up poor. And so I feel like when I get my paycheck, I deserve to buy this. I deserve to enjoy something because I never had it when I was younger. Sometimes we got to dig deeper and we find out, like, okay, maybe that person might feel justified. But if you are irresponsible and always behind on paying rent, mortgage bills, and whatnot, and those things aren't getting taken care of, then you have to question, like, well, yeah, that's true, that happened. However, we're not being financially responsible anymore. So now we have to make these adjustments. But I think the first step is that we have to become aware of where we came from. And then how is it showing up today? How is that affecting your financial decisions today? Sometimes it might be very simple. Like for the client I talked about with McDonald's, it was trying to show him, okay, this is what happened. This is what you've been feeling. Okay, now what are some of the ways you can feel worthy? Okay, what are some of the things that you can do? And so there was some activities that I gave him to help him feel like, okay, it's okay for me to spend money. It's okay. But because he now understood that it came from the guilt of what his dad inflicted on him, he was now able to make those changes. So I would just simply say, first become aware of it. And then the second thing is to understand, how is it showing up today and affecting your financial decisions, if at all?
With the clients that you are helping, even within this year during the pandemic, is there any themes that you're seeing that's almost surprising to you or new? And with that, is there any advice that you would want to give the audience from themes that you're seeing?
Sure, I think the theme that's been coming up pretty often is debt. It's a common theme that's always been there, but even for some reason, it's kind of showing up even more. And I get it because of the situation that the world is in, the countries are in, and then incomes being affected and job losses all over the place. Like I can totally understand why debt is increasing. However, it's not always a disastrous story like it's a loss of the job, because a lot of times what I've seen too is that, I find out that both people, especially if it's a couple, they were both working. So it's not always a situation of like everybody lost their job. And so because it's not always that, I realize it's again going back to lack of planning, lack of being disciplined, lack of understanding. It gets to the point when they feel, okay, this is out of control. I want to get organized. I want help. I can't do this anymore. And it gets to that point, and then they'll start to share with me some of the things that they've done. I refied, or I opened another card, or I borrowed from my parents. They're willing to give me a personal loan. But I think the theme that I keep seeing recurring is this getting into debt, but then getting to the point of like, oh my gosh, this is now out of control. Now I want help. So if anybody can take anything from this, try not to get there. Plan and be very disciplined and diligent about your spending, even if you're making a lot of money. And that's the crazy thing too. I think people think, well, if I had a lot of money, I wouldn't have these problems. No, it doesn't. That's not true. It's just your problems are typically amplified. It's just your situation times 10. I'm telling you, I worked with clients who made $400,000 and in debt, not even owning anything, no savings, no retirement, just stuff. And debt, it's not how much you make, it's how much you keep, and how good are you treating your money? How good is your relationship with money? Are you being diligent? Are you planning? Are you saving? And all these different things. Are you protecting the money? And so a lot of times it just comes down to this. Do you even have a plan? And oftentimes the answer is no, which is why people are in the situation that they're in.
I love the example you gave. Sometimes the more money you have, the more you spend. I've listened on podcasts to so many millionaires that have never in their life made over 70K a year. Some people would think that idea is insane, Jen, but it's all about your diligence and how you save and how you invest, et cetera, et cetera. Now, Jen, couple of last questions because I don't want to hold you all night, even though I love money and relationship talk. Your clients that you have, do you usually get couples? Do you usually just get the female coming to you? How does it usually work?
Yeah, I get this question often, even though I market to women, just because I have a heart for women. Because especially because of the experience that I went through, and also because I hear a lot, like women saying things like, "Well, he handles that," and I always feel like, okay, women, this is your time. This is for you to become empowered and no longer say those things. This is about you understanding what's happening with your money and in your house and what you need to do so that you are empowered and financially strong, knowing what's going on. However, with that said, it doesn't mean that I don't work with men. In fact, I told you, the client earlier with the McDonald's situation, he was a guy. So, and then yes, I can work with couples as well. Yeah.
And how does it work in your coaching? Do they sign up for a program and do like a once a week?
Yeah. So the easiest thing first is just like, hey, let's just talk. Let's just get on a 15-minute, 30-minute chat, and let's just see where you're at. It's always good to just do an assessment of, let me just hear what it is that you're dealing with. Let me hear how you're feeling. Let me understand what's bothering you. What is it that you don't want to do anymore that you can't stand? What is it that you want to change? What is it that you really want to do? I think that's so important for any coach or anybody that is helping you to understand and ask you first, not me telling you what you need. So, first is that. And then the second thing is, if you decide to move forward, then I have this thing called an X-ray call where I have other wealth coaches involved and I have a team. And so then we plug in your numbers. So the first talk is free. And then the second one's like $37. So we want to help as many people. And so it's really cool. We just plug in your numbers. We can literally tell you like, okay, stuff's going to run out by age 57. You're not going to make it past that at the rate that you're going. And
Jen, most people need to hear that.
yes. And it's simple, but do you know if that's the right number? Do you really know the ratio? Do you really know the number that you need to be hitting? It's good that you're saving. I'm not discrediting that. Good for you that you're saving, but is it enough? Is it the right amount, or you're just putting away just for the sake of it? You need to know when that's going to run out, because let me tell you guys, there have been seniors, there have been people that I've worked with or had a talk with, and they're trying to start and they're 55. Like, I'm good, but I'm not Jesus. I cannot work miracles. I'm telling you, you got to start when you can. It's so important that you take a look at this. If you're not looking at it when it's too late, don't look at it when it's a disaster. You have to be proactive. I've been saying that all since COVID. Be proactive so you don't have to be reactive. You all need accountability. You need somebody to hold your hand and help you go through step by step. Like I said, what I went through, step by step, because our brains are going to explode if I told you every single thing that needs to be done. It's just impossible. You have to approach it step by step. Life is busy. You got families, you got kids, you might be going to go to school, you're trying to get a certification for work. We can't be doing a million things at once. Give yourself some time and grace. But the thing is, you got to start now so that you have the time, especially if you're young, you have the time. Don't wait till it's like you're 60 and then you're telling me you want to retire in 5 years. It's just, it doesn't work like that unless you have some incredible idea that's going to net you like, 7 million in 5 years. Maybe we can work with that. But for most of us, that's not probably going to happen. And so it's so important that you take a look at this, you look at your numbers, and it's kind of like people not liking going to the doctor. Like, oh, I don't want to find out what's wrong. You don't want to be in that situation, because now is the time when you can make those changes. Now is the time when you can be honest with yourself and say, like, okay, I'm going to see what this looks like, but I know she said it's going to be fine. We can fix this, but you can't fix it until you have awareness.
Jen, I feel like when I read your books, I'm going to hear this voice. I feel like you're the type of writer that I can hear the voice, and I love that. You
Oh, thank you.
mentioned that in your bio that this is your sixth book. Random curious question, but which is your favorite book out of all of them and why?
Probably this one, the one I've been talking about, Do Before I Do. This one was very practical, and it was really more of like bringing awareness to certain topics that you need to talk about. I even have a question in there about, how do you handle being with a partner who's entrepreneurial? Because sometimes that affects your mindset, that affects your ego, that affects your self-worth, that affects the money. Are you going to be ready to deal with certain things like that? Have you guys talked about, should we let friends and family borrow money? It was just very filled with questions that we just overlook. And I have it segmented to different subject areas: insurance, kids and career, spending habits, credit, and it's so not a technical book. So I think that was my favorite because I felt like it's probably the one that can bring the most impact and just open up the conversation, just open up your mind to like, oh, I never thought about asking these things. And I came from a space that I wish I had these questions. I wish that in my own relationship that failed, like these are things we probably should have talked about like way early on.
Jen, your new book is going to be my engagement gift to all of my future friends.
I love it. I love it.
Seriously, I myself and you, we think money is sexy, but majority of
It
people
is.
don't. And I hope people will check out your book, and they'd be crazy not to, especially for people who are in serious relationships and starting to have those money talks. Now, Jen, obviously you are exceptionally educated and people would be so fortunate to have you as their money coach, but how do they find you?
Yes, you can find me easily on Facebook or Instagram. Just look up at Jen Money Coach, or you can just go to my site, jenmoneycoach.com, and then scroll to the bottom and just hit that button that says chat. That easy.
And Jen, obviously, I will put all of your links in our show notes and links specifically to your new book. Now, the absolute last question I have to ask you, is there anything you want to leave the listeners with in terms of money advice, relationship and money advice, you name it?
Yeah, I think it's just so important for you to take a look at the relationship you have with money. What is the energy that you're bringing into your relationship with money? And what do I mean by that is simply when you're looking at, let's say, your bills, do you come to it with this attitude of like, ugh, I hate this, like, oh, these bills again? Or do you look at it with gratitude, like, hey, you know what? Because I paid this bill, I was able to enjoy that wonderful dinner with my boyfriend. Or, you know what? Because I got this paycheck and all these taxes were taken out. I'm so grateful because somebody is paying me for my work. So do you see how it's a different energy? And the reason why this is so important is because energy is everything. And the way that you approach it, the way that you are approaching money, think of it like you being this beam of light, just emanating like this energy around you. And it's like this magnet. So if your energy is this low frequency of like, I hate these bills, I can't stand my situation, that's what you're magnetically attracting back to you. So think about this. There's a reason why some of us are staying in the same situation that we're in. So I want you to pay attention to that energy because if that's what you're feeling, pay attention to that energy that's coming out. But if you're shifting it to like, I'm grateful. This is why you hear so many times online, have gratitude. There's a reason, maybe no one has explained it why, but when you're in this gratitude, when you have this love and you're looking at things with appreciation, even when like, and give, because in order for us to receive things, we have to give it. And some of you might say, like, how am I supposed to give if I'm in debt? Give $1. Just give. It's that action. You're showing God, you're showing the universe, I am so worthy of receiving that I'm going to give it. So that's showing you value your money. Well, let's have more come to you. Let's have more opportunity come to you. It's really so important for you to start paying attention to those things, paying attention to the energy that you're sending out. Because I'm telling you, when you can start to shift that, so many things will shift in your atmosphere and opportunities and the way that you look at money. So just be very mindful of that because I'm telling you, when you can do that on top of those things that you need to take action on, it will shift things in your situation all for the better.
And I can echo Jen with saying that that advice works. And I've seen it in my own life in terms of the way you look at money and the energy that you surround around it. And it's also, I'd like to add just this tiny tidbit, take inventory of who you have surrounding yourself and how their energy is around money, because that's going to take a huge effect on your energy around money as well.
Ah, yes, brilliant. Absolutely. Yeah, that was that saying. Your income is the average of the five people you hang around most. Take inventory of what you're absorbing. Your mind is such a sponge. It's all going into your mind, your subconscious, and it is affecting every little thing. And be careful of the information that you're absorbing because it affects everything.
Jen, the conversation we had today around money and relationships is a powerful one, and especially during these times. And I want to thank you so much for your time. As we know, time is money. So I want to very much thank you for your time today and giving our audience all of your inspiration and advice.
Oh my gosh, Janelle, thank you so much. I've enjoyed this moment with you. So thank you again.
Thank you.